Welcome back to another Process 23 teaching where we help you build the DNA of your business. Today we're going to change it up a little bit and I'm going to walk you through a presentation on key performance indicators, which basically they're known as KPIs, and they are the metrics of a practice to let you know how you're doing in certain areas. So I'm going to walk you through my top 20 KPIs. But keep in mind that because they are metrics that let you know how you're doing in certain areas, you may have more or less depending on what it is that you want to measure. But remember, what gets measured gets done. So here we go. Let's dive into my top 20 KPIs.
The 20 essential KPIs. Going with the list, we'll start at number 1. Total adjusted production. Number 2, total collections. Number 3, office overhead percentage. Number 4, treatment acceptance percentage. Number 5, total adjustments broken down into categories. Number 6, collection percentage. Number 7, accounts receivable ratio. Number 8, percentage of accounts receivable aged 60 days plus. Number 9, number of insurance claims aged 30 days plus. Number 10, number of new patients. Number 11, number of whitening procedures. Number 12, total hygiene department production. Number 13, percentage of unfilled hygiene production. Number 14, periotherapy as a percentage of hygiene. Number 15, percentage of wages. Number 16, office rent mortgage percentage. Number 17, career and practice enjoyment, which I'll explain later. Number 18, amount saved in pension or savings plans. Number 19, debt to equity ratio. And number 20, CE progress, measured as good, fair, or poor. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at each one of these. Really, KPIs, or key performance indicators, are trackers. These are numbers that you're going to take a look at on a monthly basis. And like I said already, these are numbers that you may add to. You may have way more than 20. You may have 50 or 100 that you look at every month. You may have 20 that you look at on a daily basis, 40 that you look at on a weekly basis, and every month you take a look at the top 100. So there's going to be different numbers that you're going to track because remember, they're metrics that tell us how the business is doing in certain areas. So let's break it down and look at the list. Total production. Okay, this is a number that almost everyone already looks at already. You should be looking at this on a daily basis. Total production is an important number because it's going to give us an idea of really what our total sales are as a business, what our total sales are for the day, and this is essentially something you have to look at on a daily basis because this is going to tell you where you're at. Now, what I like to see is where I'm at month to date and year to date. So I want to know how I'm doing compared to last month, and I want to know how I'm doing compared to a year ago. Total collections. Obviously, this is what this is the income for the practice. Most people are already checking this as well. Write-offs. On write-offs, I like to know specifically what those write-offs look like. So for example, if you're a practice that does a lot of charity cases, then I want to know what that looks like compared to just insurance write-offs. I don't want just a generic number of, you had $8,000 in write-offs today. I want to know, okay, well, you had $8,000 in write-offs, but $7,000 of that was charity and only $1,000 of that was insurance. Okay, well, that's a different story for me. So I want to know write-offs by category. New patients. New patients is one of those categories. I was working with a group practice that had 3 locations, and they were tracking everybody's first visit as a new patient. Well, for me, I don't completely agree with that, depending on the philosophy of your practice. So For me, a new patient is somebody who's gone through the new patient enrollment process. This would be somebody who has received or has been calculated as a comp exam. So I'd rather track comp exams as new patients. Everyone's got a different philosophy on this, and it depends on what it is that you truly want to track. Hey, if you're going to track emergencies as new patients, that's fine. But to me, they haven't been enrolled into the practice. A new patient to me means somebody who is a patient of the practice. And to me, a patient of the practice is somebody who has an appointment in the future. So that's a patient. If they don't have an appointment in the future, they're not a new patient. They were just a customer that day. So that's my philosophy on new patients. I want to know specifically comp exams. Accounts receivable is something I like to know on a daily basis because I think that that's something that you can track very quickly and you can fix problems as they arise. Now, some people choose to track AR only on a monthly basis, and that's fine too. Even if you check it on a weekly basis, you can at least have an idea of where you're at. On a weekly basis, I like to look at the 30, 60, 90 report, know where you're at 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. It's an aged report. At the monthly basis, in our monthly staff meeting, I want to look at it and know specifically a breakdown of what's at 60 and 90 and know where I can get involved. And then gross profits is another key KPI that you can look at that most dentists already look at, but most dentists look at it as how much money do I have in the bank? And what I want to know specifically is what's our profits? Breaking it down even further, we'll go to overhead percentage breakdown. So this can obviously change depending on your total sales. So if your production is up, your overhead percentage should be down. So that's one of the ways that you can control your overhead. It drives me crazy when I talk to dentists who want to try to save their way to prosperity. When I was helping grow an organization of hundreds of dental practices, we constantly ran into dentists who wanted to just try to cut their overhead percentage by changing their overhead on dental supplies. Well, look, on average, dental supplies are 6% or less of your overall spending. And driving that down is not going to affect your profit margin that significantly. Sure, it helps, and it's something you need to be working on 100%. But the reality is that if you increase your sales significantly, your overhead percentage is going to go down just automatically, just based on normal profit margins. So when we look at overhead percentage breakdown, it's more of a general sense of just getting an idea of where we are at. The next one I like to look at is treatment acceptance percentage. This is important to me because this will give me an idea of how my doctors are doing on selling dentistry in essence. I want to know what percentage of treatment is scheduled versus what percentage of treatment is presented. We conducted a survey one time to find out what doctors' treatment acceptance percentages were. And we cross-referenced that with what they thought they were. Most doctors, when surveyed, think that their treatment acceptance is over 80%. The reality is that most doctors' treatment acceptance percentages are less than 40%, usually hovering in the low 40s. So there's obviously a discrepancy there. And what I've seen from the data is that most doctors who've had more experience have a higher treatment acceptance percentage. Part of that might come from confidence. Part of that just comes from experience. Part of it comes from the trust and relationships that the patients have with the doctor. But if I compare that with, say, a new associate who has a really low treatment acceptance percentage, it shows me where there's a teaching opportunity to help them increase their close rate, essentially. And even with older doctors, or just a general practice, if the treatment acceptance percentage is hovering around 40%, then we know that we have a great opportunity there because we're obviously presenting the treatment. So we either need to present a whole lot more, or we need to get really good at presenting the treatment. The next thing we look at is collection percentage. And like I said, I like to see a breakdown of that. I want to know what percentage of collections comes from credit cards, what percentage of collection comes from checks, what percentage comes from cash. And the reason I hold my team accountable for this number is not so much of monitoring what my collection percentage is, because I already know what my collections are. But if I know what percent, if they're recording what percentage comes down as checks and cash, it's going to help reduce my theft ratio. It's going to reduce the amount of skimming that's going on. I don't want to encourage my team. I don't want to give them opportunities to steal from the practice. So this is just another way to hold them accountable, to let them know that I am watching everything that goes through the practice. The next thing I like to watch is insurance AR reports. And the reason I like to watch insurance AR is because the reality is that as good as insurance companies are or think they may be, is that there are some insurance companies that don't pay on time. I want to know who they are, and I want to hold them accountable. I also want to know if we're having higher claim denials from certain insurance companies. And if they are, I want to be the one that's writing them a nasty letter. I find that when I write a letter, that my acceptance rate goes up significantly over when my office manager writes a letter, and only because it's from me and because sometimes I write in things that get their attention. Like, any fool can see from this picture that this tooth is cracked and the patient was having pain and something needed to be done, and that something was a crown. When you write things like that in there, it's not the normal verbiage that they're used to seeing, and the fact that it's from a doctor, the acceptance rate typically goes up. So I like to know what the insurance AR reports look like. Another thing I like to track is the debt to equity ratio. Now, if you're a practice that doesn't have any debt, then this is really not an issue for you. If you are a practice that has debt, this would be an important thing to monitor. And this is something that comes from the balance sheet. So when you run your balance sheet, it'll tell you what your debt to equity ratio is, or you can figure it out very quickly. This will be important if you are getting ready to sell the practice, or if you're a newer practice and you're trying to develop the equity in your practice over time. So if you're a newer startup practice, or if you've just built a new location, or you remodeled, or you bought a bunch of new equipment, this will be one of those ratios you want to keep an eye on. Wages percentage, obviously, once again, as your sales increase, your wages percentage will decrease typically, but it is considered a variable cost. So, if your sales increase, then you typically will get a little bit more overtime, you'll get more hours from your team. So this can be considered a variable cost. So I want to keep an eye on this anyway. There are times in certain practices where this percentage will be fairly high, especially if you have an older team. At one point in my practice in Colorado, we had our wages percentage was up to 40%, but we had an incredible team. We also had a large team. So we focused on the customer experience significantly. So we had people dedicated to making sure that people had a great experience. So we accepted the fact that we had a higher wages percentage. We also had some team members that had been on the team for over 20 years. So that was important to us too. And that's one of those things that you can influence to a certain extent, or you can look at it and say, hey, you know what, we've got too many employees. We need to knock off some people off the payroll. Another thing you can look at is the lease percentage, and this really should be a fixed cost. This is one of those numbers, this is one of those key performance indicators that I look at only on an annual basis. It's more of a quick look-see, make sure that we're within reason and that everything is on target there, that our percentages are lined up, and to make sure that we're not paying too much of a percentage on our lease. Breaking it down further, we'll go to really what I call the hygiene KPIs. Now, this is one of those areas, if you want to have a thriving practice, you're going to monitor a lot of numbers from hygiene, way more than these, because I'm a firm believer in having a kick butt hygiene department. If you have a hygiene department that does a third of the production of your practice, let's say you have a $3 million practice and hygiene does $1 million of that, that is a huge asset from a business perspective. That means a third of your income is produced that's not directly related to you. And that is a huge blessing. So having a great hygiene department is very, 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 very important for a practice. It's also your annuity for dental treatment. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of flow through your hygiene department so that you have plenty of dental treatment coming out of that as well. So many the restorative treatment. So we want to look at hygiene production by provider. There's a huge variance typically between hygienists on what they produce, at least when you start monitoring this. Once you start monitoring this and you share this information with the hygienists, it creates sort of a friendly competition between them, and they typically, their production starts to equalize. Part of it is because they'll start sharing. There's a sharing of best practices that occurs with hygienists a lot of times, that when they find out that one is producing an average of $2,000 a day and one's at $1,500 a day, they all start asking the other one what she's doing or what he's doing. And when you get that, that's a great, great thing for your business. So I want to know what the breakdown is by provider. I also want to know what the perio percentage is. What is the percentage of hygiene production that is attributed towards scaling or root planing, whether it's limited or full quadrant scaling or root planing? I want to know what that percentage is. I was working with a group practice and we ran these numbers. They had never monitored what their perio percentage was. When we looked at it, they had 3 locations. They had 8 hygienists, and between those 3 locations and 8 hygienists, they were averaging 6 scaling and root planings a month. Total, 6. So each hygienist was doing, on average, less than 1 scaling and root planing a month. Well, those numbers don't gel exactly with the national percentages of, what the data says the percentage of the population that has periodontal disease. If you believe the data out there that says that 30 to 40% of the population has some form or some level of periodontal disease, your numbers in your practice should be very similar. So that's a very important number for you to be monitoring with your hygienists and making sure that you're meeting with them on a consistent basis too, to really try to get an understanding so that they can see where they're at as well. The next number that I monitor is unfilled hygiene. I want to know how many hours of unfilled hygiene I have at the end of the month. This is huge to me because what this represents is a giant missed opportunity. And so I don't review the number for the sake of being mean to my team, but I want to know what our missed opportunity was that month. And then what I do is I share that with the team. And like I said, I don't do it to be mean. I'm not a ruthless leader, but I want them to know that, look, we had 10 hours of unfilled hygiene last month. If we averaged 200, let's just keep it round, $200 an hour, that means we had $2,000 last month of missed production for the practice. Not to mention the other restorative dentistry that comes from that and other opportunities that could have arisen from those appointments. Well, $2,000 might be what some of the people in your office make a month. That's their payroll. That's their mortgage payment. And so keeping that in perspective for everyone really helps, and let them know how important it is to not have unfilled hygiene. We need to fill every hygiene appointment that we possibly can. The next key performance indicator that I look at in the hygiene department is whitening. Whitening is an important KPI, and the reason it's important because it gives me an idea of what the practice is focusing on. If I have a higher number of people that are interested in whitening procedures, then that means I have a higher percentage of people that are interested in cosmetic procedures. I like that because it gives me an indication of what I need to be looking at in my practice. Also, maybe I see a spike in whitening, which means, oh, okay, so maybe something's looking good in the economy. Maybe something's looking good for my patients. Maybe I should be promoting more whitening. Maybe I should be promoting more cosmetic type procedures. It gives me an indication of really sort of the health consciousness of my customers. And then once again, there's possibly others that you're going to want to watch in hygiene. Some of the other numbers that you're going to want to watch in hygiene would be recare effectiveness rate, what the percentage is of patients that have appointments coming up. You want to know how many of our patients overall actually have a hygiene appointment scheduled. So there's lots of other numbers you can monitor within hygiene, but that's kind of the top ones at a glance. So let's go on and break it down even further. And these are what I call the intangibles. So CE progress, we all have to take CE. So it's important that we monitor the KPIs related to CE. How is your progress? How many CEs have you taken? I like to get a glimpse of this at our monthly staff meeting. And we just pull it up real quickly. And as we're going through our list of KPIs, the office manager or whoever's leading the meeting will say something like, okay, CE progress, doctors, did you guys take any CE this month? And I go, oh, you know what? I did. I took 2 CEs and I need to get the certificate. Will you remind me to get that to you? Yes. Okay, great. Or you know what? No, I haven't taken any. Where am I year to date? You've only taken 6 hours this year. Oh, crap. Okay. All right. Well, then remind me that after this meeting that we need to get something scheduled so that I can get some of my CE on target. So I like monitoring CE. For me, that's important. Practice enjoyment. This is obviously one of those intangibles, but it's extremely important to me because, hey, we spend plenty of time at our practice, don't we? I mean, you spend a lot of time there, and you should really enjoy what you're doing. You should enjoy dentistry. Dentistry is a great profession. I love doing dentistry. I love working with patients. I love working with my hands. I still love dentistry. And so your practice enjoyment should be equally as high. On the days that you're on vacation and you tell people how much you love your job, that's how much you should love your practice on a daily basis while you're there. So practice enjoyment level. So what I do is at our staff meetings, we'll go around and say, what's your practice enjoyment level on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 is this is the practice of my dreams, and 1 is I hate this place and I'm about to go postal. And so you record those numbers and it gives you an idea where everyone's at. If the doctor's at a 9 and everyone else on his team is at a 2, well, then there's a huge discrepancy there, and it's something we need to explore. If everyone's at a 9, well, then awesome. You're off to the races. So practice enjoyment number is another one of those KPIs that I track. The other one is retirement planning. The reality is that in society in general, only about 2% of people are financially independent at age 65. 2%. And for dentists, in dentistry, it's one of the highest earning professions on the planet. We do great as a profession. We make a lot of money. Sadly, our number is only double the general population. On average, only about 4% of dentists retire financially independent at age 65. 4. Now, granted, the numbers can be skewed and they can be off a little bit, but our numbers are not very impressive. So retirement planning needs to be something that you're tracking on a consistent basis. And I like to track that on a monthly basis. It's harder to do at an annual basis, harder to catch up at the end of the year when you're also thinking about your tax bill that's coming up. So I like to track retirement planning on a monthly basis. So when we look at the percentages, overhead percentages, this is just a general rule. And obviously, depending on the life cycle of the practice, these numbers are going to be different too. Like I was saying, you might have employees that have been with the practice for 20 years, and you might be a practice that's only been in business for 2. So your numbers are going to be completely different depending on where you're at the life cycle of your practice. You may not contribute a lot to marketing because your practice is pretty full. You're cranking it out and you don't need any more really significantly more new patients. So you may not do any marketing. You may not have any legal or professional fees. Your team percentage might be a little bit higher and it might be a little bit lower. You may do in-house crowns with a CEREC machine, so you may not have a lab fee, but typically I still try to track my lab, my in-house CEREC lab and that sort of thing as a lab percentage as well. But regardless, the numbers can be skewed a little bit, but this is kind of a general rule that gives you an idea. I like to make sure that even if you're an owner dentist in the practice, that you still get paid the same way as an associate would get paid at the practice. So I think it's very important, especially if your end game, you always have to think about your end game. Are you going to sell your practice? Are you going to sell it to a corporation? Are you going to sell it to another dentist? What's your end game? And so one of the things you need to look at is clearly differentiating what you get paid. Pay yourself as an associate. Pay yourself anywhere between 31% and 35% of collections. That's what you get paid. Then at the end of the month or quarterly, pay yourself a management fee and then pay yourself dividends or profits. Keep all those fees separate so that you can differentiate that when you go to sell your practice. Don't try to backtrack it. It's way too hard to do that. So keeping those numbers clearly differentiated will be important. And then remember too that as your production increases, some of these percentages are going to go down. Now, obviously, some of them are fixed and some of them are variable costs. But in general, your overhead percentages will go down as your sales increase. If you're planning to sell your practice at some point to a private equity firm or a large group, you have to know your EBITDA. This will be something that you can work with your accountant on, and it'll be something that you want to make sure that you're managing. The longer you can be managing your EBITDA number prior to selling your practice, it will help in the process. So if you could have at least a 3-year record of your EBITDA, now this is something you can go back and create too, so it's not a big deal. You can pull it from the data going back. But it's something that I like to look at when I look at a practice. So many doctors go to sell their practice and they think that their practice is worth a lot more than it really is. You can go out and you can get an evaluation done of your practice. And they might come back and tell you that your practice is worth $2 million. Well, the reality is that most people won't pay $2 million for a dental practice. So you can already knock some money off of that price. What I've seen in general, and I've looked at 7 different models of how people evaluate dental practices. Out of looking at those 7 different models, what I have found is that on average, a dental practice sells for about 65% of what the annual collections are. So if you have if you collect $1 million a year, your practice will typically sell for about $650,000. Now, that can be variable. It can be based on the buyer. It can be based on all sorts of things. The condition of the building, the condition of the equipment, what needs to be done in the office, when was the last time you refurbished or remodeled, what's the demographics of your patient base, what's the amount of current patients that you have that have appointments and don't have appointments. So if you're going to be selling to a business, so like a private equity firm or a large group, they're going to look at it as a business. And when businesses buy businesses, they evaluate a business value based on EBITDA. So that'll be a number that you'll want to track as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you about KPIs. Remember, key performance indicators are the metrics that demonstrate how a company is doing in certain areas. So make sure that you're keeping track of your KPIs and monitoring them as much as possible. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you. At Process 23, we're dedicated to helping you build the DNA of your business. Make today great.